All right, Twitter is once again in the headlines, this time for the new Twitter war between model Chrissy Teigen and POTUS. In a recent tweet, the model called the president multiple expletives and lamented him for not tagging her in a tweet where he criticized her husband, musician John Legend, as he paneled on MSNBC about criminal justice reform. Meanwhile, a friend of the show, Daniel McAdams, who is the executive director of the Ron Paul Institute, was just banned from Twitter for using the term retarded. For more on this big tech bias and censorship of our First Amendment rights, Daniel McAdams himself is joining us on a panel along with investigative journalist Ben Swan to discuss this growing trend from social media companies. Guys, good to see you both. Daniel, first, explain to us what happened to you, what sparked the tweet that got you in trouble with the Twitter police, and how they approached you before they just, outright banned you.
Yeah, it's really bizarre. I simply made a tweet. I was watching Hannity's show. Sean Hannity spent an hour talking about the horrors of the deep state. The deep state's after Trump. They're terrible. They're terrible. And then I noticed that in a close-up, he's wearing a lapel pin of the CIA. And I'm thinking, what is going on here? This is absurd. He's attacking the deep state while supporting the CIA, which is the deep state. So after that, I followed up and I said, he really is retarded. Which is maybe not a nice word, of course, but if you look at the Webster's Dictionary, for example, the number 2 definition is a very stupid or foolish person. So technically, it's correct, but it did run afoul, and I was just simply banned. And I tried to explain that actually, no, I didn't violate your principles or your terms of service. And, there's just no answer.
Well,
no answer.
Oh, really? How did they approach you when they told you that they banned? Just emailed you, and that was it?
Yeah, I appealed the ban, the suspension, and they said your suspended account will not be returned
wow.
because of this violation. Hateful conduct, they called it.
Oh, it's violent language, terrible language. Ben, you and I have frequently discussed this problem about how social media platforms seem to kind of pick and choose which accounts to suspend or ban entirely. Do you see any rhyme or reason to their methodology as to whom they target?
Yeah, I actually think there's a pretty clear rhyme or reason. Anybody who is anti-media establishment, anyone who is anti-war, anybody who is anti-big government policies gets banned from Twitter. That is the standard that they're using. I mean, if you look at what Twitter is doing, if you look at what Facebook is and all these other companies are doing, is they are systematically removing anyone that the Atlantic Council doesn't like. Anyone who is not a globalist, anyone who believes that we should not be in these endless wars around the world, killing millions of people, they want you gone. And Daniel McAdams, quite frankly, you're an offensive person because you believe that we should stop killing people around the world and we should stop bombing countries indiscriminately. And therefore, you have no right to a voice on social media platforms. That is the thinking of these people. The reality, Manila, is this, that we do not have social media companies anymore. We have political social engineering companies. That's what they are. Political social engineering companies that are running these tech companies.
Daniel, what about that?
He is absolutely correct, and people will say, well, this is a private company, they can do what they want. But as Ben pointed out, these companies do use U.S. government-funded agencies and quote-unquote NGOs to determine who can be on there and who can't. The Atlantic Council is funded by the U.S. government in part and funded by NATO in part. So someone like myself or others who criticize our foreign policy, they find themselves in the crosshair. There is no objective way you can look at their terms of service, which is that you can't promote violence against, directly attack, or threaten anyone else on the basis of race, et cetera, down to disability. So for what I said to have actually violated their terms of service, Sean Hannity would actually have to be mentally retarded, and I made fun of the fact or threatened him on the basis of his mental disability, which I did not do. I used a stupid schoolyard term to describe a stupid person.
Unless they're,
they want transparency.
They're kind of tacitly agreeing with you, I think, then, aren't they?
But that's the term that he uses, an offensive term, but it is not an obscene term. Right, and there is a difference there, even in terms of what the rule would be. It's an offensive term that he used, but it's not hate speech.
Right.
It's an offensive term. But the other reality is this, that Daniel mentioned, people who say they're private companies. That is such an untrue statement. Yes, they are private companies, but they have, number one, public shareholders within the companies. But number two, more importantly, there are laws, I've talked about this to you before, Manila, laws like Section 230 of the Communications Act that protect companies like Facebook and Twitter because they call them platforms.
Right.
If they want to be private publishing companies, take away that protection under the law, and they would all have to close down overnight. We cannot create laws that protect companies as if they are platforms for the public, then say, but they're a private company, therefore they do not have to act as a platform for the public. They got to pick and choose. You got to be one.
But you guys,
but to pretend that they're neither is crazy.
At this point, though, at this point in our society, like you both said, these social media tech titans are acting as they choose because they technically are still private companies. I mean, don't they reserve the right to do as they choose? You know, no shoes, no shirt, no service type of thing. Can't you pick and choose who your customers are?
Yes, you can, but the U.S. government protects them right now. Stop protecting them with laws that say that they are platforms, not publishers. If they were a publisher like everyone else, then they can be sued for what goes on their platforms. But right now, they can't be because they are given protection under the law. So get rid of the protection, and then they can do whatever they want to do.
Daniel, go ahead.
I was going to say, certainly you could look at some fraudulent practices. You know, if you look at their terms of service and objectively have a look at what they say, and when you do something that is not in violation of that, or when, as I did, I simply did a search on Twitter for that word. It's been used millions of times. It's used constantly, all the time, with impunity. Yes, it's an offensive word. I was channeling my inner Napoleon Dynamite, if you've ever seen the film. You know, I sometimes take on that persona. But, you know, they demand accountability from us. They demand transparency from us as their users, but they simply don't reciprocate and give any kind of accountability or transparency according to how they do business.
Right. Okay. So, I mean, it appears like you kind of trolled Sean Hannity, and somehow, you know, you get in trouble for it when, you know, the president himself trolls people with harsher language than that. But you guys, should there be, you know, other types of laws in place for social media platforms that, you know, allow for free speech? But if they did exist, those laws, wouldn't that also protect, for example, like terrorism recruitment? Where should we draw the line, or should there even be a line drawn? Daniel first.
Well, it's difficult for me to say something like there ought to be a law, but I would certainly rather not see them in bed with government-funded agencies determining what political content is appropriate. And this is not a left issue or a right-wing issue. This is an issue of the elites, of the Beltway elites determining they don't want any voices out there challenging the current U.S. foreign policy paradigm of endless interventionism. And that's why people like Peter Van Buren, who was kicked off permanently for just telling the mainstream media, you guys, you know, are buying the State Department line, hook, line, and sinker without any type of research on your own. These are the kinds of people that get banned.
Yeah, so it looks like they were looking for a reason to ban you, and they just used this one as that reason. Ben, I'll give you the last word here.
Look, bottom line is that I think the answer to this is not laws. The answer to it is competition. We need free speech alternatives being built up in media. That's why we're working to build one through ICE Media. But there are going to have to be free speech alternatives that are created in order to be able to challenge the status quo and ultimately have consumers move over. Those of us who care about free speech need to build the platforms. Those who care about it need to populate those platforms rather than continuing to populate platforms that, as I said, are just becoming arms of the State Department.
All right, very interesting talk. I wish we had more time for it, but I'm sure we will continue with this another time. Daniel McAdams, Ben Swan, thank you both for being with us.
Hey YouTube, thanks for checking out our channel. We hope you enjoyed the video. We have tons of content for you just like this. For more of RT America's one-of-a-kind news and analysis, be sure to subscribe and never stop questioning more.